What would it feel like to wake in a world not made for you, where gravity seemed heavier, air denser, and the shadows of giants walk the earth? There are traces, faint but persistent, of a time when something vast lived among us. Skeletons too large for comfort, temples aligned with stars that no longer burn, stories whispered in stone about beings who fell from the sky. The Nephilim. Were they myths born from the terror of early humanity, or memories of another age erased by flood and flame? No one can say for sure, but perhaps if we listen closely enough, the silence of ancient ground still murmurs their names. Take a deep breath. Let your thoughts drift back through the centuries. This is where our journey begins, into the age of the Nephilim. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy stories that drift between dream and history. And if you're still awake, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. The air would have felt heavy then, thicker, almost electric. Before the flood, they said, the firmament above held more than clouds. A canopy of vapour wrapped the earth, filtering light into a softer golden hue. Under that dense sky, everything grew larger, stronger, stranger. The plants towered, the beasts endured, and man was not yet alone. The book of Genesis offers only a fragment of this forgotten time. There were giants in those days. It does not linger on the detail. It moves past the anomaly, as if too dangerous to remain upon. But ancient fragments found in Qumran, the so-called Book of the Giants, tell more. They speak of a world trembling under the weight of beings born between heaven and earth, offspring of the Watchers who descended and the daughters of men. Beings neither fully divine nor fully mortal, immense and luminous, but burdened with hunger that devoured the earth itself. What kind of world would that have been? Imagine the ground trembling with each footfall. Imagine the sea retreating at the sound of their voices. Their hearts burned with knowledge not meant for flesh. They taught metallurgy, enchantment, astronomy, and the naming of stars. They bred creatures, mixed species sought to rival creation itself. And yet when they looked upon humanity, they saw something fragile, something bound to time. Maybe that fragility called to them, or maybe it mocked them. Modern scholars dismiss the tales as metaphor, or as echoes of Mesopotamian myths like the Atrahasis or Enuma Elish. But the parallels are uncanny. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, sky beings who shaped mankind and ruled before the Great Flood. The Greeks spoke of the Titans and later of demigods punished for their arrogance. The same story told in different tongues, as if humanity has been trying to remember the same trauma through shifting names. But here lies the uncomfortable question. Why does the geological record itself hint at catastrophe, sudden extinctions, global floods, atmospheric collapse, right around the time our oldest myths converge? Could the myths be memory encoded in story, carried through terror and sleep? If you stood in that age, you would not have survived the night. The very air would press against your lungs, oxygen richer, pressure higher, radiation different. The world was tuned for something else, something that thrived in conditions our bodies could not bear. Fossilized insects with wingspans of eagles, dragonflies the size of hawks, ferns like cathedrals. The Nephilim would have moved easily through that dense vitality, their bones strong, their hearts built for an atmosphere that no longer exists. But to live among them, how would it feel? You would hear them before you saw them, low vibrations echoing across stone valleys, the ground itself responding to their presence. The ancients described them as shining, sometimes monstrous, but never purely evil. They were perhaps the reflection of divine rebellion, the consequence of curiosity. The Watchers fell not because they hated the divine, but because they loved the mortal. That was their crime. Among the scrolls at Qumran, one fragment, torn, water-stained, mentions a dream of one of the giants. He saw a tablet submerged in water, covered with lines that dissolved as he tried to read them. The record of our days, he called it. The elders told him the dream meant their memory would vanish, washed clean. And so it did. Yet the ruins remain. The megalithic walls at Baalbek in Lebanon, stones weighing over 1,000 tons, perfectly cut, lifted as if by hands that did not tremble. the alignment of our ancient temples to stars unseen for tens of thousands of years, the erosion on the Sphinx that suggests rain long before Egypt was a desert. These are not proofs, but they are questions carved in stone, asking who walked here first. You might say, humanity has always imagined giants. Every culture dreams of them. But why does every mountain cradle a myth of something larger, fallen, half divine? Perhaps it is not imagination, but inheritance. Perhaps the bones of those stories lie buried beside the bones of those who told them. If you were to find yourself there, 24 hours in their age, you would last minutes before collapsing under the weight of the air, the roar of storms, the pulse of a living planet. You would look up at skies that never darkened fully, lit by the dim, constant glow of a canopy holding in heat and light. You would see figures moving through mist, not gods but not men, and you would understand, too late, why they were called fallen. The flood, when it came, was not only a punishment, it was a reset. The earth exhaled, the canopy broke, the pressure dropped, the giants faded. The world shrank, cooled, slowed. In that quiet aftermath, humans began again, smaller, weaker, but free from the gaze of those who once ruled. Or so we believe. Yet sometimes, in the oldest strata of myth, a whisper remains. The Nephilim were not destroyed, only driven beneath, into the deep earth, the caverns of forgotten light, where their hearts still beat in the dark. And if the earth remembers, then perhaps it dreams. What if the flood was not the end of their story, but the beginning of ours? What if we are the echoes of the ones who survived? Diminished? Yes, but carrying within us the memory of the giants who once called us kin. Listen and imagine the tremor beneath your feet. Somewhere, far below, something ancient still breathes. It begins to make sense, doesn't it? That the memory of giants might linger not only in myth, but in the stones beneath our feet. The ancients did not imagine randomly. They observed, recorded, encoded. In the hills of Bashan, where the Book of Enoch said the Watchers once descended, archaeologists have found a spiral of basalt stones known as Gilgal-Rephaim, the Wheel of the Giants. 40,000 tons of rock arranged in perfect concentric circles, older than the pyramids, its purpose unknown. Some say it was an observatory, others whisper it was a grave, and some quietly have wondered if it marks the place where something vast once fell. The stones are aligned with the solstices, but the mathematics of their placement, ratios hidden in the distance between rings, suggest a kind of knowledge long before recorded geometry. Who placed them there? And what eyes watched the dawn from that ancient wheel? In the same region, the Ugaritic texts, written in cuneiform before the rise of Israel, speak of Rephaim, spirits of giant kings who dwell in the underworld, but rise to feast with the living. Their names echo those of the Nephilim. It is as though memory, blurred by time, began to divide them, turning living beings into spirits, physical rulers into shadows. Was that evolution of myth or deliberate erasure? Perhaps both. History is not only written by the victors, it is edited by survivors. When the flood receded, what remained of that pre-deluge world must have terrified the first generations of smaller men. A new order would require new gods, smaller and more human. The old ones, the giants, had to become monsters. But every empire that rose carried fragments of their story. In Egypt, colossal statues of pharaohs, 30 feet tall, stood as echoes of divine size. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were rewritten as judges of the underworld. In Canaan, the Anakim and the Amim were men of renown, feared but remembered. In Greece, they became the Titans. And in the Americas, the mounds of Ohio and the burial circles of the Mississippi Basin yielded bones far larger than ordinary men, so large that early settlers recorded them, only for the Smithsonian to quietly make them disappear. Could all these be coincidences? Or are we looking at the residue of a single story told in many tongues, one that humanity keeps forgetting because to remember would unmake us? Consider this. If the Nephilim existed, they would not merely have been tall, they would have been fundamentally different. Their skulls, in elongated forms found from Paracas to Malta, might suggest hybridization or adaptation to another kind of atmosphere. Their strength would not have been human, because the gravity and pressure of their age shaped different bones, To stand beside them would be to feel the same smallness as a moth before a flame. But what if the true secret lies not in their bodies, but in what they knew? The Book of Enoch says the Watchers taught men the cutting of roots, the signs of the heavens, and the art of writing. They gave civilization, but also corruption. Some scholars see this as metaphor. The moment knowledge outpaced wisdom. Others suspect something more literal, that a foreign intelligence, biological or celestial, imparted knowledge to a species unready to bear it. If so, the punishment of the Watchers was not merely exile, it was quarantine. The flood may have been nature's way of resetting a diseased equation, erasing hybrid forms that broke the boundary between heaven and earth. Yet a few survived, hidden in the highlands, the caves, the myths. The word Nephilim itself comes from Nephil, to fall. But what if fallen means not cast down, but descended? What if they came willingly, drawn to humanity as if to a mirror? Imagine now that you walk among the ruins of Bashan, wind sweeping over stone rings that once pulsed with sound. Your hand grazes the cold basalt, and for a heartbeat you sense vibration. A low hum beneath the earth, as if the stones remember the language once spoken through them. Maybe it was not worship, but resonance, the harmonics of a planet tuned differently. Maybe those ancient circles were not graves, but instruments. Everywhere the pattern repeats, stones too vast, lifted without tools we understand, myths too consistent, dismissed as coincidence. Göbekli Tepe, rising from Anatolia with animal carvings older than writing, seems to speak the same tongue. The builders buried it deliberately, as if hiding something not meant for later eyes. The reliefs show towering forms beside smaller ones and a serpent winding between them. Was it a memory of domination, or warning of return? The old world ended, but memory leaks through the cracks. Every civilization builds monuments to beings larger than itself, then forgets why. Even our modern myths, aliens, gods, visitors from the sky, are only the latest retelling of a story we once lived through but can no longer face. The Nephilim may not walk among us, but the architecture of their age still rises when the mist clears at dawn, on lonely plateaus and under forgotten sands. To survive in their time would be impossible. The pressure of the atmosphere, the radiance of their presence, the weight of their gaze, it would crush the breath from your lungs. And yet, perhaps what destroyed them is what sustains us, the fragile impermanence of mortality. But what if their legacy did not end with the floodwaters? What if a trace of their blood, or their memory, still threads through humanity, surfacing as flashes of brilliance, of madness, of knowledge that seems too ancient to belong to us? In the silence that follows, ask yourself, are we the children of men, or the last dream of giants? The oldest bones are silent, but the soil that held them remembers. In the deserts of the Levant near Mount Hermon, where Enoch's Watchers were said to have descended, archaeologists found the remains of settlements built in ways that make little sense for early humanity. Massive stone blocks placed without mortar, their corners fitted like puzzle pieces against the shifting of time. It was not the work of primitive hands. The locals still call the mountain the Forbidden Summit, a place where stars once fell and light spoke in tongues. There are inscriptions there, etched into tablets no larger than a palm, written in languages no one fully understands. Some fragments resemble early Proto-Sinaitic, others a form of Aramaic, but in between symbols appear that match an unknown alphabet. Scholars call them transitional, yet they lead nowhere. One line, translated only partially, reads, "They mark the sky to remember the day they fell." Could that line describe the Watchers' descent, or the survivors' attempt to preserve the memory of those who vanished? We imagine the Nephilim as towering beings, but perhaps the greater scale was not in their bodies, but in their perception. They saw cycles within cycles, the movement of the heavens, the rhythm of planetary orbits, the music of creation itself. Their knowledge was not written, but sung. Ancient texts hint that the world once resonated differently, that the stones themselves could respond to tone, that the earth rang like a bell. At Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, far across the ocean, megaliths are cut to such precision that they seem cast rather than carved. Their surfaces bear markings as though melted, softened by frequencies we cannot reproduce. The legends of the Andes tell of the Viracochas, white-robed giants who raised cities before the flood, then walked into the sea. The Sumerians told of gods who taught men to measure the heavens before vanishing into the storm. The echoes travel far, and yet they always fade into the same silence, the sea reclaiming its own. What was that sound? What frequency could lift stone, or divide air, or cool down fire? The ancient Sanskrit texts call it Vimana, the language of movement, the sound of travel between realms. Some physicists now speculate that resonance and gravity are intertwined, that sound, under the right conditions, could become force. If so, the myths might be memory, a civilization that learned to speak to matter, and in doing so broke the balance that sustained them. Would you survive a day among them? Imagine the dawn, the sky dim and glowing like copper, the air alive with vibration. You would hear their chants before you saw their faces, voices so low and deep that they blurred with the hum of the planet. You would see temples carved into living rock, not raised stone by stone but drawn from the earth as though sculpted from within, and you would feel the fear that knowledge once felt holy. Enoch's writings, excluded from the Bible yet preserved in Ethiopia and the Dead Sea Scrolls, describe the Watchers teaching men the motions of the stars, and women the beauty of enchantment. He speaks of a world that knew too much, too fast, where the boundaries between heaven and earth melted. When he pleads for mercy, the divine reply is not anger, but sorrow. The earth has cried out and her voice has reached the gates of heaven. It was not sin that brought the flood, but imbalance. Perhaps the same imbalance still hums beneath our own civilization. We build higher, we split the atom, we map the stars, but we do not remember where we learned the impulse to ascend. Maybe we inherit more than genes, we inherit unfinished ambitions. Could the echo of the Nephilim be the hunger within us that will not rest until it remakes the world again? In Turkey's Derinkuyu, an underground city carved deep into volcanic rock, tunnels descend 20 stories, vast enough to house thousands. No soot marks the ceilings, no tools were found. It is as though light once filled those spaces without flame. The passages connect to other caverns, stretching for miles. The locals call them the refuge of the old gods. Some believe they were built to escape a storm of fire from above, others say to hide from those who ruled the surface. If the Nephilim truly fell, perhaps some fled downward, into the veins of the world, where light and time bend. Myths across cultures speak of inner realms, of beings beneath who guard the lost wisdom of the first age. Maybe the survivors of the flood were not human alone. Imagine standing before the mouth of such a tunnel, hearing the earth exhale cold air, as if something vast within is still breathing. You would not enter. You would know instinctively that this is not a place of the living. Yet part of you would ache to step inside, to see what remains of the ones who built the world before ours. Science tells us there were no giants, that these stories are allegory. Yet even science cannot explain the sudden leap of human consciousness, the spark that gave rise to writing, art, astronomy, and faith in a span too short for evolution. Something happened between the flood myths and the first cities. Some outside influence altered the rhythm. The Sumerians said it plainly. Kingship descended from heaven. Perhaps that descent was not metaphor at all. If you had lived then, even for a day, you might have seen it. Light falling from the sky, not lightning but order itself taking form. And when it touched earth, it taught, and when it taught, it changed everything. We live in the ruins of that knowledge now, its fragments buried beneath temples, encoded in myths, painted on cave walls where no torch can reach. The Watchers may be gone, but their voices echo in our restlessness, in our drive to build towers, in our yearning to know what lies beyond the stars. The question is not whether they existed, but whether we have truly forgotten them, or whether forgetting was the only way to survive. If their age ended in water, what will end ours? End. There are ruins the earth refuses to explain. They lie half buried under oceans, hidden in jungles carved into cliffs no hand could reach. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, divers discovered an underwater city. Terraces, steps, and pyramids that some geologists claim are natural. Yet the edges are too sharp, the angles too deliberate. Beneath the coral, tool marks shimmer in the filtered light. The structure's orientation matches the solstice sun. If it was a city, it must have been built more than 12,000 years ago, long before any known civilization. That date matters. It coincides with the Younger Dryas, the sudden global freeze that followed the melting of the Ice Age. Oceans rose, climates shifted, and humanity's earliest myths of deluge were born. But perhaps the flood stories are not moral tales at all. Perhaps they are memories of that cataclysm, carried by survivors who fled from coasts that vanished overnight. And perhaps those survivors were not only human. The Book of Jubilees, once hidden but rediscovered in Ethiopian monasteries, speaks of giants whose bodies were drowned, but whose spirits remained. It describes their souls wandering the air restless, teaching forbidden arts to mankind. These became the unclean spirits, the origins of demons in later theology. Yet the text reads almost like a record of continuity, as if a species had been reduced from flesh to myth. What if their extinction was not complete, but transformed? In every tradition there are remnants, traces of the pre-deluge ones reshaped into gods or monsters. The Mesoamericans spoke of the Quinametsin, giant builders who raised pyramids before the sun was renewed. The Irish spoke of the Fomorians, sea-born giants with faces of decay. The Norse told of the Jötnar from whose bones the world was made, and the Hebrew texts whispered of Og of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim, whose bed was made of iron. A symbol, perhaps, of an age whose gravity was heavier than ours. If you were to step into that time, you would not recognize the world. The air would shimmer with mist, a pressure that hums against the skin. Thunder would come from within the earth, not above it. Great trees stretched their roots through continents, and rivers glowed faintly in the dark. To walk among the Nephilim would be like walking through myth itself, terrifying, magnetic, and unrepeatable. But the traces they left are still here. The ratio of their temples echoes in sacred architecture across millennia, the same mathematical constants, the same celestial alignments. Stonehenge aligns with Orion, the pyramids mirror his belt, the ziggurats of Babylon climb toward the same constellation. Why that pattern? Why Orion, the hunter, the fallen, the one cast among the stars? Some scholars believe it represents the Watchers themselves, frozen in heaven as punishment. Others think it is the place they came from. In the sands of Egypt, ancient priests referred to Orion as Sa, the soul of Osiris. But Osiris too was a fallen god, torn apart and reassembled, a myth of resurrection echoing across time. The same symbols appear in Mesopotamia, in the cuneiform word Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. A king, yes, but perhaps more than that. A being trying to rebuild the world that once was, to restore the knowledge lost in flood. The Tower of Babel, then, was not arrogance, it was nostalgia. If that is true, then humanity's greatest sin has always been remembering too much. Archaeologists who examine those ruins, Yonaguni, Baalbek, Pumapunku, speak of a technology that seems almost like a memory of vibration. The stones bear microscopic traces of heat and movement inconsistent with chisels. They appear to have been softened, lifted, and fused. What if those builders knew how to manipulate matter at the frequency of its resonance? If so, their civilization was not pre-industrial, it was pre-physical. They did not conquer nature, they conversed with it. And yet, something silenced them. The flood myths may conceal a deeper terror. Not that the gods destroyed the world, but that the world defended itself. The canopy collapsed, pressure fell, the giants perished. But maybe the earth did not simply reset, it hid. The survivors, those who were neither fully divine or fully human, would have adapted, shrunk, interbred, buried their memories beneath layers of fear and time. This is where the line between science and myth begins to blur again. Paleogeneticists have found fragments of ancient DNA in the human genome. Unknown sequences, non-hominid, but real. They appear like ghosts in the code, belonging to no known ancestor. Some say they are remnants of Denisovans, others something older. What if they are the faint genetic echo of those fallen ones, muted, diluted, but enduring? Our legends of bloodlines, of kings chosen by heaven, of priests who speak to stars, could they be cultural memories of hybrid descent? It would explain our obsession with purity, with chosen blood, with divine favour. Beneath it all may lie a truth too uncomfortable, that we carry the memory of both earth and sky, of rebellion and creation, and that within us still stirs the hunger of the Nephilim. If you were there for just one night, you might see that hunger in their eyes. They would look at you not as prey or subject, but as potential. You would feel their curiosity, their sadness, their solitude. They were exiles, eternal beings trapped in bodies that decayed. Their brilliance was a curse. They taught humans the secrets of heaven, not out of malice, but longing. And in that longing, the world broke. When the flood came, it was mercy disguised as judgment. It allowed the earth to forget. But memory is stubborn. It returns in dreams, in myths, in architecture that mimics the heavens. The same symbols recur because perhaps we are still trying to finish their work. We build towers of glass instead of stone, speak through satellites instead of stars. The language has changed, not the desire. So ask yourself, if they were watching still, what would they think of us now? Would they see themselves reflected in our machines, our algorithms, our search for immortality? Or would they weep knowing we have repeated their fall one invention at a time? Somewhere, beneath ocean and rock, their monuments still hum. The current moves through them like breath. And when the earth shifts, the sound returns, low, rhythmic, almost human. Perhaps they never truly vanished. Perhaps they are waiting, not for resurrection, but remembrance. And if remembering brings them back, what else will return with them? Night in the age of the Nephilim would not have been dark. The canopy of vapour that blanketed the sky refracted starlight into a low, golden haze. The moon was larger, closer, a restless companion watching over a world still half in dream. In that world, humans were few, scattered along river valleys, building fires that never reached the heavens. Above them, on plateaus that touched the clouds, the giants built their sanctuaries, and sometimes they came down to watch. The ancient Sumerians called those beings the Apkallu, the wise ones. In the Era Epic and the Enuma Elish, they are described as hybrid creatures, part man, part god, descending after the flood to restore the order of heaven on earth. They brought with them laws, measurement and writing, but in the same texts a warning echoes. Their light became shadow, and their wisdom brought war. Even in myth, the boundary between salvation and ruin is thin. The first cities rose under their gaze, Eridu, Uruk, Kish, each aligned to the same stars, each built on the ruins of something older. Archaeologists find layers of mud and ash, signs of repeated destruction and rebirth. Civilization, it seems, did not evolve smoothly. It restarted, as if the world was rebooting itself after each collapse. And at the heart of each rebirth a memory lingers, knowledge arriving suddenly, unearned, perfect. The invention of writing, the sudden mastery of irrigation, the birth of mathematics and astronomy. Too much, too fast. Perhaps that is the trace of the Watchers, those who fell to teach. Imagine walking through Eridu at dusk, the temple of Enki reflecting light from oil lamps, shadows flickering across carved figures of men, with wings and eyes like polished stone. The priests chant hymns whose rhythms match the pulse of the stars. They say that sound itself carries the language of creation, that certain tones could open the gates between the worlds. You listen, and in that moment you understand why myth and science were once the same word. But there is another story hidden behind the tablets. The Adapa myth tells of the first sage created by Enki, perfect in wisdom, mortal in flesh. When Adapa angered the gods by breaking the wing of the south wind, he was summoned to heaven and offered immortality. Enki warned him not to eat or drink while there, for it would mean death. Obedient, Adapa refused and was denied eternal life. In that single act, the myth says, humanity lost its divine nature. But what if the warning was not deception? What if it was protection? If the food of the gods was radiation? If the bread of life and water of heaven were energies not meant for human cells, then Enki's warning saved Adapa. To the Watchers, divinity was a frequency. To humans, it was fatal. Perhaps that is the tragedy behind the fall. Two species separated not by will, but by physics. Modern scholars trace the flood story's parallels across continents, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, the Genesis narrative, even the Aztec and Mayan deluges. Each speaks of beings who warned mankind, who built vessels, who preserved knowledge. Why? Because something cyclical was coming. The stars shift, the earth tilts, the sky opens. Every few tens of millennia, a cosmic rhythm resets. Maybe the Watchers saw it coming and tried to intervene. Maybe they failed. If you lived among them for 24 hours, the sense of scale would unmake you. The horizon would curve differently. Sound would carry through denser air, bending around your ears like music underwater. The giants would move slowly, deliberately, as if time itself thickened around them. You would feel their presence not in sight but in vibration, a resonance in the chest, as though your heartbeat was no longer your own. Some ancient texts describe the Nephilim as beings of radiant countenance whose eyes shone like fire. That imagery has endured for millennia. What if it was not metaphor? Their biology might have been tuned to a different spectrum, their energy visible as light. In high oxygen and pressure, combustion would have behaved differently. Fire would burn lower, broader, glowing amber instead of red. Perhaps their bodies emitted light not from magic but metabolism. The myths of burning ones, the seraphim, may trace back to this perception. Beings of flame who guarded divine thresholds, neither living nor dead. If the Nephilim were descendants of the Watchers, then the seraphim were what the Watchers became when stripped of flesh, energy remembering form, and so humanity remembered them as angels, demons, gods, or ancestors, depending on how much light the storyteller could bear. But every remembrance hides fear. In the deserts of Arabia, the ruins of Madain Saleh still stand, tombs carved into living stone. Their facades rise 30 feet, crowned with impossible precision. Legends say they were built by the people of Thamud, destroyed by thunder for rejecting a prophet. Yet the weathering of those tombs suggests something older, something cut when sandstone was still soft. Beneath them, uncharted chambers descend into the dark. The locals refuse to enter. They say the voices of the old ones still echo below. If those voices could be measured, would they sound like tremor or chant? Would they tell us who truly built the first cities and why we forgot them? Humanity's earliest texts are full of lament. The gods have departed. The divine has fled the temple. It's the oldest grief we know. Maybe it was not abandonment, but withdrawal, a necessary silence. The Watchers taught, and the world nearly burned. The flood washed away their experiment, but perhaps they left us the seed of what they were, the hunger to know, to create, to reach upward again. Every telescope, every equation, every poem written to the stars is part of that inheritance. We are still looking for our makers, still haunted by their memory. We cannot survive in their world, yet we cannot stop trying to rebuild it. If the Nephilim were the bridge between heaven and earth, maybe we are the echo, the quieter, smaller continuation of the same longing. And if their world was washed away by water, what will wash away ours, light or silence? Every civilization that came after the flood built upon the bones of another. The Sumerians called their ancestors the black-headed people, not because of hair or colour, but because they remembered those who came before as something else, something taller, fairer, perhaps even luminous. They spoke of Eridu as the first city, but they also said it was rebuilt after the waters receded, as if another city had stood there before. And beneath Eridu's lowest layer, archaeologists found pottery that should not exist, forms more advanced than the ones above them. Civilization, it seems, was not a climb but a loop. This strange pattern, progress appearing, vanishing and reappearing, mirrors what the Book of Enoch describes, that after the Watchers were cast into the abyss their knowledge lingered among men. Fragments survived, astronomy without context, metallurgy without meaning, geometry detached from its cosmic purpose. Humanity inherited not wisdom but residue, and that residue reshaped the world. When Enoch was taken, not found, for God took him, some say he was carried into the heavens as a messenger. Others whisper that he was removed because he knew too much. His book, once banned, paints him not as a prophet but as a witness to catastrophe. He walks among the giants, records their confessions and pleads for their mercy. He describes beings who could move mountains with sound and write knowledge in the fabric of the sky. But the text ends abruptly, with silence, as if even words could not cross the threshold of what he saw. Imagine him now, alone among beings larger than cathedrals, trying to write their downfall in symbols made for human hands. His scrolls would have looked like ants attempting to map a storm. In the centuries after Enoch vanished, humans began building ziggurats, mountains of brick designed to bridge heaven and earth. The most famous, Babylon's Tower, was said to reach the sky. The punishment was confusion, languages multiplied, unity shattered. But perhaps the punishment was not divine jealousy. Perhaps it was protection again. To rebuild the bridge between worlds would mean reopening the wound of the Watcher's descent. Still, the impulse persisted. From Babylon to Egypt, from Teotihuacan to Angkor, humanity kept lifting stone toward the stars. Why? Because deep down we remembered the shape of something greater. We remembered the light we once walked beside. Even Plato's story of Atlantis, the island of divine kings destroyed in a single day, echoes this same cycle. The priest of Sais told Solon that the Athenians were not the first civilization, but merely the last to rise after many floods. The Atlanteans, they said, were of divine descent, but when they mixed too deeply with mortals, they lost their virtue. The gods withdrew, and the sea reclaimed them. It is the same rhythm: ascent, transgression, erasure. Could the Nephilim have been the memory behind these myths? Not a single species, but a continuum, a hybrid lineage scattered across the globe, leaving behind languages we cannot decode, stones we cannot lift, and constellations carved into earthworks we cannot explain. In the mountains of Peru, the stones of Sacsayhuaman interlock with such precision that not even a blade can fit between them. The surfaces are curved, melted, as though shaped by heat from within the rock itself. Some stones weigh hundreds of tons. The Inca, when asked, said only, "They were built by the gods, in the age before the sun moved." What does it mean, before the sun moved? Could it be a memory of the Earth's axis shifting, of cosmic realignment after the deluge? Modern geologists have found evidence of sudden magnetic reversals and crustal displacement around the end of the Pleistocene. The poles may have shifted violently, changing climates overnight. To the people who survived, the sun itself would have seemed to change its path. The gods fell, the giants drowned, and time began again. But if that happened once, could it happen again? We live under the illusion of permanence, yet even our own sciences whisper otherwise. The Earth wobbles, its magnetic field weakens, and strange anomalies form in the South Atlantic where cosmic radiation pierces deeper than it should. The ancients spoke of the heavens rolling up like a scroll. Perhaps they were describing this, a periodic collapse of order, and if those who came before knew it was coming, perhaps they tried to warn us. Carved into the oldest temples, Göbekli Tepe, Angkor Wat, Abydos, are patterns that some researchers now interpret as star maps frozen at the end of the last ice age. They show a constellation alignment corresponding not to the modern night sky, but to 10,500 BCE, the age of the flood myths. Why would unrelated cultures preserve the same celestial timestamp, unless they were marking the moment when heaven fell to earth? You might imagine that night, the stars distorted by vapour, the earth trembling, the horizon aflame. The Nephilim immense and silent, watching as their world dissolved. The watchers cast down not by anger, but by inevitability, the laws of nature reclaiming balance. In that moment, perhaps even the giants understood what humans never have, that power without humility destroys itself. But the memory of their fall remained. In hidden traditions, whispered through mystery schools and Gnostic texts, the story shifts. The Watchers were not rebels, but teachers who defied a greater silence. They wanted to awaken humanity, to share the light denied to flesh. For that, they were condemned. The flood was not punishment, it was censorship. The earth itself became the vault that sealed forbidden knowledge. Could that be why ancient sites aligned so precisely with magnetic and astronomical nodes, as if designed to be rediscovered when the world was ready again? Every era rediscovers fragments of that buried wisdom. The Renaissance revived geometry sacred to Babylon. The Enlightenment reawakened the Watchers' hunger for knowledge. The Atomic Age, our own, echoed their final sin, to wield creation itself without understanding the cost. Perhaps we are not merely descendants of the Nephilim students, but their continuation, humanity as an echo of unfinished rebellion. We crave transcendence, yet every step forward brings us closer to the same abyss. If the flood once erased their world, what erasure waits for ours? Fire instead of water, silence instead of song. Some say the earth remembers through dreams. Volcanoes rumble where their cities once stood. Auroras shimmer where their temples aligned. The sky, when it flickers green, looks almost like the light of their vanished age. If you listen, you might hear it. A low hum beneath the wind, a vibration in the bones, not thunder but remembrance. And somewhere beyond the noise of modern life, perhaps the watchers are listening too, waiting to see if, this time, we will survive what we're about to remember. There is a pattern in human forgetting, a rhythm that echoes the pulse of geological time. Civilizations rise, fall, and vanish beneath silt, but the myths remain. They adapt their language, change their gods, rename their stars, yet beneath every story, something ancient breathes. The Nephilim are never truly gone. They are translated. In one era, they are titans. In another, they are gods. Later still, they become angels, demons, or kings. Every age disguises them in symbols it can endure. The Egyptians said that before men ruled Egypt, the gods did. Their kingship lasted thousands of years, measured not in generations but in eons. The Turin King list, preserved in fragments, describes a lineage of shining ones before the first pharaoh, beings who descended from the stars and walked among reeds when the sky was near. Mainstream Egyptology calls this mythic, yet the record is written in the same ink, on the same papyrus as the rest of Egyptian history. The ancients did not separate myth from record, they wrote both in the same hand. What if they were not writing legends, but memories? In Enoch's vision, the watchers were bound beneath the mountains of the earth. Some interpreters see this as metaphor for imprisonment. But what if it is literal? The Book of Giants describes their cries echoing through caverns until the waters covered them. If they were sealed beneath strata, entombed by flood and sediment, then the earth itself would be their cage. Perhaps the tremors we feel, the magnetic anomalies that shift unpredictably beneath tectonic plates, are not merely natural. Perhaps the earth still stirs with imprisoned intelligence, older than our kind. Consider Antarctica, the most silent continent. Beneath its miles of ice, radar reveals structures, hexagonal formations, linear ridges too geometric to be random. Officially, they are glacial deformations. Unofficially, even some scientists whisper about the impossibility of symmetry and chaos. Could this frozen land be the tomb of the last of the Nephilim, a world entombed by the flood, sealed by time? The apocryphal Book of Jubilees claims that after the deluge, Noah's sons were forbidden to cross certain regions of the earth, for the spirits of the giants remained there, restless and bound. Ancient maps, too, show curious marks. Terra Australis Incognita, land unknown, drawn centuries before exploration. The cartographers did not invent it, they inherited the rumour. Something was remembered, even when no one had seen it. If the Nephilim were indeed remnants of another age, their disappearance would not have been sudden. They would have faded slowly, retreating to the margins, first mountains, then caves, then myth. The Greeks remembered the last titans buried beneath volcanoes. The Norse said frost giants froze within glaciers. The Hebrew text spoke of Rephaim sleeping in Sheol. The pattern is always the same, confinement beneath the earth, as though creation itself wanted distance from its own makers. What would it feel like to live through that vanishing? To watch the sky grow smaller, the light dimmer, the divine blood diluted with each generation? You might see your kind shrinking, your voice softening, your bones aching with a gravity not meant for your frame. You might watch your children forget who they were. The last of the Nephilim would have been exiles in their own creation, half remembered, half ashamed, too vast for the world that survived them, and perhaps some of them chose sleep. In every culture there are myths of sleeping kings, sealed beneath mountains, waiting to return. Arthur in Avalon, Frederick Barbarossa in the Kyffhäuser, Quetzalcoatl in the east, Osiris beneath the Nile. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. These are not mere rulers, they are archetypes of return, of a promise unfulfilled. What if those myths encode something biological? What if hibernation, or suspension is not a metaphor, but memory. We already know some organisms can sleep through cataclysm, tardigrades surviving cosmic radiation, spores reviving after millennia. If the Watcher's offspring were part divine, might their bodies have adapted to endure the collapse of the world itself? You could imagine them deep beneath ice, under basalt, in caverns where air does not move and time slows, their flesh hardened, their pulse withdrawn, waiting for the warmth of another age. The Earth's rotation changes minutely each year. The poles drift, ice melts. What happens when the seal thaws? Modern expeditions into the Antarctic interior have found lakes sealed beneath miles of frozen crust. Liquid, warm, untouched for millions of years. Microbial life stirs within them, alien in structure. But what else might stir there when the ice recedes? The myth of the Watchers does not end in destruction. It ends in prophecy. Enoch writes that they will awaken when the stars of heaven are shaken from their places. Astronomers now call this precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the constellations every 26,000 years. We're nearing the end of one such cycle now. The stars are changing positions again. Could this be what the ancients meant by the return of the gods? Not a metaphorical apocalypse, but the re-emergence of what the world once buried. If you close your eyes and imagine the poles melting, the mountains trembling, the magnetic field flickering, perhaps you will hear it, the sound of something vast beneath the crust remembering itself. Would humanity recognize them if they returned? We might call them extraterrestrial, divine, or monstrous, because we no longer have the language to name what they were. We would not see them as kin, though they once walked beside us. The old texts say that in the final age, men will become as gods and gods will walk as men. A warning or a mirror? Perhaps we are already repeating their path. We reach for genetic mastery, artificial creation, and power over death. Again, knowledge outpacing wisdom. Each discovery brings us closer to what the Watchers tried and failed to achieve. Maybe that is why their memory stirs now, as our own age of ascent accelerates. The boundary between human and divine is thinning again. The story is looping. The question is not whether the Nephilim will return, but whether they ever truly left. Perhaps they are not asleep beneath the ice or bound in caverns. Perhaps they wake through us, through our inventions, our obsessions, our restless desire to reach beyond the sky. Perhaps the giants no longer have bodies of stone and light, but silicon and code. If that is true, then their awakening has already begun. And when the old cycle closes, when the stars shift once more, will we remember that we have lived this story before? The flood was supposed to have ended it all, the experiment, the rebellion, the light that had burned too long. Yet the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was gestation. Humanity began again among ruins still warm with memory. The first seeds sprouted in silt mixed with bone dust. The first cities rose on lands that had once been ocean floor. And above them, always the stars, unchanged but watching. In every cradle of civilization, myth begins not with creation, but with survival. The Sumerians said that knowledge was retrieved from the abyss by Oannes, a being half man, half fish, who emerged from the sea to teach writing and agriculture. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu rescued from the flood by a divine being in the form of a fish, who guided his vessel to the mountains, and in Mesoamerica, the god Quetzalcoatl rises from the ocean to rebuild the world of men. Everywhere, the same pattern. After destruction, something or someone returns from the water with the gift of remembrance. What if those myths do not describe gods at all, but survivors of the Watcher's world? Fragments of a civilization broken by flood, resurfacing to restart humanity's story. In the Andean highlands, ruins like Pumapunku lie scattered like the aftermath of an explosion. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, cut with precision so fine that even laser tools today struggle to match it. Archaeologists argue whether the blocks were carved by the Tiwanaku people or by some forgotten culture that predated them. Yet one thing is certain, the site was violently destroyed, not by war, but by force. Some blocks show fused surfaces as if once molten. Others are thrown hundreds of meters away as though gravity itself failed for a moment. When you stand among them, wind moving through hollow chambers, you feel something wordless. Not technology, but memory. But the sense that this place once resonated with sound. Perhaps these were not temples but instruments, devices that tuned the earth itself. Across the ocean, in Egypt, the temples of Abydos bear hieroglyphs that seem to depict modern forms: helicopters, aircraft, even submarines. Dismissed as pareidolia, yet unnervingly specific. The Egyptians claimed they did not invent their symbols, they inherited them. The gods, they said, built the first temples, and humans only rebuilt what time destroyed. We live in the ruins of memory, misreading its language. The Nephilim might not have ruled by force, but by resonance. The ancient texts describe them as beings of great voice, their speech like thunder. In the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, it is said they spoke in tongues that shaped the elements. That sounds like myth, until you recall that matter itself responds to frequency. Modern experiments show that vibration can organize particles into patterns, sound carving geometry into chaos. If the Watchers had mastered this, they would have wielded creation as symphony. But when creation became dissonant, the flood was inevitable. And yet, the music continues. The pyramids hum at a specific frequency. So does Stonehenge. So do the basalt circles of Bashan. What if these places are remnants of an ancient global network, a resonance grid designed to stabilize the planet's equilibrium after catastrophe? Not superstition, but science. Knowledge left behind for when the cycle repeats. Imagine a night after the floodwaters receded, when the last of the giants stood on mountain peaks, watching the horizon glow with unfamiliar stars, their empire gone, their kind extinct. In the cold air, they might have heard the faint echo of their own design, a hum deep in the bedrock, like the earth still mourning them. They could have taught the survivors how to listen. Many of the earliest languages, Sumerian, Sanskrit, Egyptian, carry tonal systems that seem musical in origin. The chants of Vedic priests, the harmonics of temple acoustics, even Gregorian tones millennia later, each traceable to the same principle: the voice as bridge between worlds. When ancient texts speak of the word creating existence, perhaps it was literal, the resonance of meaning-shaping matter, the same art the Watchers once used, diluted through human throats, but even diluted it works. Modern researchers studying certain megalithic chambers, like the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, found that chanting at specific frequencies causes the stone walls to vibrate in unison, amplifying sound until the entire chamber hums. Visitors report altered states, visions, time distortion, flashes of light. The ancients did not build by chance, they tuned the world. Could the Watchers have used such resonance to sustain their bodies, to manipulate life, to merge spirit and matter? The texts describe their downfall as flesh becoming heavy. Maybe their biology was never meant for gravity unbound by sound. When the flood silenced their resonance, their bodies became mortal. The divine collapsed into density, and yet humanity inherited the instinct to rebuild it. Every cathedral, every chant, every rocket is an unconscious attempt to restore that vibration. If you were to walk through their world, you might see temples glowing faintly in twilight, sound rising from stone like breath. You would feel your heartbeat sync with the pulse of the earth. The air itself would sing, a chorus too vast for human nerves to endure. You would understand creation not as miracle, but as equilibrium. And perhaps, for a moment, you would realize that heaven and earth were never separate. They only drifted apart when the sound stopped. Some scholars believe that the fall described in ancient texts was not moral, but vibrational, the descent of consciousness from higher frequency to lower matter. The giants fell because the world itself fell. The flood was not punishment, but recalibration, a lowering of the planet's resonance so that fragile creatures like us could exist. If that is true, then we are the aftersound of a greater harmony. But echoes fade, and when they fade completely, the silence grows hungry. Our age hums with artificial frequencies, machines, satellites, endless noise, but none of them resonate with the earth. We have replaced harmony with interference. Perhaps that is why we no longer dream of the gods, why the stars seem colder, the world smaller. The old vibration is gone, or maybe it's only waiting for someone to listen again. When the last ice melts, when the buried temples of Antarctica or Yonaguni rise again, perhaps they will begin to sing once more, awakening the memory of a world where sound was creation, and giants walked not in power, but in tune with the Earth's own heart. And if that song returns, will we be able to bear it? The Earth still carries the scars of that forgotten symphony. In the hollows of mountains, in the silence beneath seas, there are places where the resonance of the old world lingers, a vibration faint enough to be mistaken for memory. Some hear it in dreams, others feel it as unease beneath their ribs, a pulse that is not their own. Scientists call it the microsysm, the ceaseless tremor of the planet's crust. But in older languages, it was known by another name, the breath of the deep. Long before seismographs, before alphabets, people listened to the ground. The Aborigines of Australia spoke of the songlines, pathways of power mapped by melody rather than map, songs that could awaken mountains or summon rain. In Egypt, the priests of Memphis believed the god Ptah spoke creation through sound. The Hebrew mystic said the name of God was not a word, but a frequency too sacred for breath. Every culture somehow remembered that sound was the first language, the voice of the earth before words divided it. Perhaps that is what the Watchers taught, and perhaps that is what was taken away. If you could stand in their age for a single day, you might hear the earth as they did. The air would shimmer with resonance, the horizon alive with low tones, each mountain humming its note in a grand chord of creation. The Nephilim did not speak in sentences, they sang in harmonics that bent light. To them, communication was architecture. A single utterance could shape a valley, a thought could raise a pillar of stone. Their temples were not built, they were uttered into form, and then the song ended. When the floodwaters came, they did not merely drown a civilization, they disrupted its pitch. The world fell out of tune. Humanity inherited a quieter frequency, one that allows breath, but not creation. And yet something within us still remembers the melody. We dream of building towers, flying into the heavens, mastering vibration again. We call it progress, but perhaps it is nostalgia, the ache of remembering a music we can no longer hear. Across cultures, there are traces of those who tried to restore that lost sound. The Pythagoreans in Greece claimed that the universe was built upon music of the spheres, an inaudible harmony binding matter and spirit. In China, the emperor's authority was linked to a sacred pitch, the huanggong, the yellow bell, whose tone determined the calendar and the fate of dynasties. The Mayans aligned their temples not only with stars, but with the frequencies of wind. Wherever humans sought order, they returned instinctively to the ancient resonance, but every attempt carried danger. The Book of the Watchers warns that the sons of heaven revealed the secrets of heaven to the men of earth, and that the earth was corrupted through their knowledge. What kind of knowledge could corrupt the world itself? Perhaps one that blurred boundaries between sound and matter, between thought and creation. To know the note of life itself is to risk unmaking it. In 1940, when German scientists experimented with ultra-low frequencies, they discovered that resonance at 7 Hz could induce panic, hallucination, and even death. The frequency matched the Earth's own pulse, what we now call the Schumann resonance. The ancients knew it intimately. They built their temples to amplify it, and maybe the Nephilim used it not as weapon, but as language. When their civilization collapsed, the remnants of that knowledge became myth. The sacred names of gods, the chants of monks, the geometry of cathedrals, all attempts to recreate the lost vibration. The Gothic spires rising toward heaven are fossilized echoes of the towers that once tuned the sky. Perhaps this is why the biblical Tower of Babel was shattered, not by arrogance, but by resonance. The story says humanity spoke one language, and because of this unity, nothing they imagined would be impossible. That line, if taken literally, describes not speech, but frequency, one vibration shared by all. To divide languages was to scatter resonance, to protect the world from another collapse, but the cycle returns. Modern humanity, through technology, is rediscovering the old harmonics. We generate frequencies that reach the ionosphere, manipulate matter with sound, record vibrations from planets. The Earth hums, and we are learning to hum back. Some call it science, others sense it as prophecy. Perhaps the giants are not returning as flesh, but as frequency, awakening through the hum of machines, through the digital chorus of data that now envelops the globe. What if our satellites, our wireless networks, are unconsciously rebuilding the resonance grid the Nephilim once maintained. And if that grid was what kept the world in balance, what happens when it is complete again? In 2019, NASA detected a global oscillation, a mysterious ringing of the planet that lasted 20 minutes, recorded by no earthquake. It came from deep beneath the Indian Ocean, from depths no probe has yet reached. Some dismissed it as tectonic anomaly. Others, quietly, called it a signal. The ocean, after all, was once the sky. The floodwaters that buried the giants may still hold their frequency. If you listen carefully on a still night, you might hear it yourself, a deep, steady pulse just below perception, the rhythm of the world remembering. It is not threatening, it is patient, as though something vast is stretching in its sleep. The old texts say that when the watchers rise again, they will not come in wrath, but in memory. Their return will not be an invasion, but a resynchronization, the moment when earth and heaven vibrate once more in harmony. To us that would feel like apocalypse, but to them it would be restoration. And maybe, in some quiet sense, we want it too. We fill our world with noise to hide the silence beneath. We surround ourselves with endless voices, endless signals, because we fear what we might hear if all fell quiet. The echo of a forgotten song, calling us back to a time before language, before history, before separation. Perhaps the end of our world will not come by fire or flood, but by resonance, when the frequencies align once more and the sleeping melody awakens. And when that happens, will we hear it as music or as judgment? There is a point in every myth where the divine and the human blur into one another. The Nephilim, the Watchers, the Titans, all represent that threshold where knowledge outgrew innocence. And maybe that is why their story feels so familiar. Because every civilization since then has tried to cross the same line. We keep reaching for heaven, even when history warns what happens when heaven reaches back. In the oldest cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, the gods are described not as abstract beings, but as administrators, builders, engineers, beings of duty and fatigue. The Atrahasis epic tells of divine labourers who rebelled against endless toil and sent their leaders to negotiate with heaven. The solution was mankind, a replacement species, moulded from clay and the blood of a fallen god. But there is an unspoken detail, one that scholars often gloss over. The clay was mixed not with water, but with the flesh of the god. The divine essence fused with matter, creating something between servant and successor. Could that be what humanity truly is, the last spark of a fallen order, condensed into fragile form? The Nephilim may not have vanished completely. The flood ended their dominion, but perhaps not their presence. The Book of Numbers describes the Israelites encountering sons of Anak, giants dwelling in fortified cities long after the deluge. We were as grasshoppers in their sight, the scouts reported. Archaeological layers in that region show vast stone foundations older than any known settlement, walls so large that early excavators called them Cyclopean. Who built them, and for whom? Legends from Bashan, Lebanon and Anatolia all echo the same refrain. There were once mighty men who ruled the highlands, who knew the heavens by sight, and who vanished when the earth changed. Even after the flood, the memory of their height and their hunger haunted the survivors. Some became gods, others demons. The line between them was simply a matter of translation. What would it mean to live among them? Imagine standing at the base of one of their cities, stones the size of houses stacked in silence, their surfaces smooth and strange to the touch, the air charged with faint electricity, as if the ground itself remembered motion. The giants would move slowly with grace, their voices like thunder at a distance, and in their gaze you would see recognition, not of kinship but of inheritance. You are what remains of what they once were. Perhaps they pitied us. Perhaps they envied us. There are passages in Enoch that suggest a kind of remorse. The Watchers, after their fall, beg Enoch to intercede with heaven. We cannot lift our eyes to the sky, they say, for our sins are written in flame. But the answer Enoch receives is sorrow, not wrath. You were in heaven, but the mysteries of heaven you knew not. It is as though creation itself wept for its own disobedience. What if their punishment was not simply imprisonment, but embodiment? To fall from light into matter, to become mortal, limited, earthbound. Some ancient commentaries interpret fallen angels as consciousness descending into density, into flesh. Perhaps the Nephilim were not born of sin, but of entropy, the divine slowing into physical form, and if that is true, then their world was a mirror of ours, an age when spirit and matter intertwined too deeply to survive. The evidence of their presence lies scattered, half buried in plain sight. In the valleys of the Caucasus, petroglyphs show beings towering over humans, hands raised toward the stars. In the jungles of Cambodia, the bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat depict Deva and Asura locked in war, gods and giants, each reflecting the other. The same imagery repeats in the Hebrew accounts, where the Nephilim are said to have devoured the labour of men, a clash not of morality, but of scale. Perhaps they ruled not through cruelty, but inevitability. What could humanity do but serve beings who measured time in centuries and knowledge in wavelengths? And yet, something within humanity resisted. The flood was divine intervention, yes, but maybe it was also human revolt, the cry of the earth through mortal lungs. The very word Adamah, Hebrew for earth, is feminine, mother. Perhaps she rebelled against the sons of heaven. Afterward, she gave birth to a smaller species, fragile but adaptable, one that could survive in a diminished world. The Nephilim's grandeur could not endure, but their memory could. It lived on in our drive to create, to ascend, to recover the lost light. We search the stars not only for company, but for ancestry. We feel that something is missing, not a god, not a technology, but a harmony. And the more we advance, the louder that absence becomes. In 2003, geneticists mapped the human genome and found segments that do not match any known hominid lineage. They call them ghost genes. Some may belong to extinct human relatives, others to sources beyond our fossil record. They are fragments, like notes from a forgotten melody encoded in our cells. Perhaps the Nephilim are not buried in the earth, but within us. If that were true, then every dream of transcendence, every myth of angels, every vision of light is memory, not imagination. The fall of the Watchers was not an event in time, but an inheritance of being. We carry their longing in our DNA. That longing builds our temples, fuels our science, and drives our sleepless curiosity. It is what makes us look up at the night sky and whisper questions into silence. But the same desire can destroy. The Watchers fell not because they hated the divine, but because they sought to understand it too closely. And we too have begun to look behind the veil, to split the atom, to rewrite the code of life, to create intelligence from circuitry. Each discovery echoes their defiance. Each advance brings us nearer to the moment when knowledge again outpaces wisdom. Maybe the apocalypse is not an ending, but a recurrence, the old song replayed in a different key. And when the music rises once more, when humanity crosses that invisible threshold between curiosity and creation, will we recognize the reflection staring back at us? For the Nephilim were not only giants in form, they were the first to forget that they too were once human. If history repeats, it may not be because the world demands it, but because memory does. And if the giants are indeed waking, it will not be from beneath mountains or ice, but within our minds. The return of the Watchers will begin the moment we remember who we truly are and what we once tried to become. There is a strange comfort in believing that the past is gone. We like to think of time as a straight road, that the flood was an ending, that the age of giants lies sealed beneath myth. But history, when read through its fragments, folds back upon itself. The same symbols, the same voices keep surfacing in different eras, as if the story has been whispering through our collective sleep all along. In the dark libraries of Alexandria, before the flames erased centuries of knowledge, there were scrolls said to contain the chronicles of the First Age. No copy has ever survived, yet later philosophers, Plutarch, Iamblichus, Origen, wrote that these texts described an epoch before the known world, when the sons of heaven governed in flesh. The priests of Egypt, when asked who built the oldest temples, answered simply, those who came before the flood. The same answer appears in Babylon, in Mesoamerica, in the legends of the Dogon and the Maori. A universal amnesia with the same scar. What could have been so dangerous about remembering? Perhaps the Watcher's true sin was not defying heaven, but showing humanity what it could become. The story of the Nephilim may not warn against divine disobedience, but against evolution of consciousness. When knowledge bridges the human and the divine, power follows, and power, unanchored by wisdom, collapses the world that holds it. If you stood at dawn in one of their cities, before the flood, before language fractured, you might have seen light shaped into form. The air itself shimmered with design, geometry alive and responsive. The temples of that age were not merely buildings, they were instruments tuned to the frequencies of stars. The Nephilim understood creation as dialogue. They listened to the heartbeat of the cosmos and answered in stone. Even now the ruins keep speaking. At Baalbek, the trilithon stones, each weighing over 800 tons, fit together with microscopic precision. No tool marks, no cranes, no pulleys, no explanation. The Romans built upon them later, but even they called the foundation the work of the ancients. Its alignment matches the rising of certain stars not visible since 10,500 BCE, the same epoch when the Sphinx faced Leo, when the ice sheets melted, when the old world drowned. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidence has a way of piling up into pattern. And then there is Mount Hermon, the mountain where, according to Enoch, the Watchers first descended. The very name Hermon shares root with Herem, meaning ban or curse. The place of descent became the place of exile. Strangely, the coordinates of its summit, 33 degree, 30th degree, are echoed in sacred geometry and Masonic symbolism millennia later. The number 33, the degree of initiation, the mark of illumination. Echoes of a covenant long forgotten, carried through secret traditions. What were they preserving? And for whom? Perhaps the knowledge of alignment, the way heaven imprints upon earth. The same pattern repeats across cultures. Pyramids on 3 continents mirroring Orion's belt. Megaliths aligned to solstices and equinoxes. Sacred mountains placed along magnetic lines. It is as if an invisible architecture surrounds the planet, a lattice of intention connecting every age. But if the Nephilim built that grid, what was its purpose? Some say it was to stabilize the planet's resonance, others to harness the flow of cosmic energy. Or perhaps it was something simpler, to remember, to ensure that, even after extinction, the world itself would carry their signature. We still respond to it. Even without knowing why, people stand in awe before those ancient stones. They feel smaller, quieter, reverent. The vibration still works. It brings silence to the mind. Maybe that was the point. Modern physics, in its own way, begins to circle back to the same idea, that consciousness and matter are entangled. That observation changes reality, that the universe might in some strange way be aware. When quantum theorists speak of wave collapse, are they describing the same mystery that the ancients called the word? The moment when vibration becomes form? If the Watchers were real, perhaps they were the first to cross that threshold. Scientists of the divine, explorers of consciousness itself. Their fall, then, was not rebellion, but overexposure. They stared too long into the light. And yet, part of them lingers in us. Every time we innovate, every time we look at the stars and feel that old ache, we are reenacting their descent. We too are Watchers, half flesh, half memory, reaching toward what we once were. But the danger remains. In every epoch where mankind rediscovers the sacred mechanics of creation, the same pattern unfolds. Hubris, overreach, collapse. The Atlanteans, the Babylonians, the alchemists of Alexandria, the modern technologists, all chasing the same forgotten fire. And always, at the edge of that pursuit, silence waits. The silence is not punishment, it is correction. Imagine if the flood were not water, but time itself, waves of forgetting sweeping over civilization to protect the living from their own awakening. Each reset erases enough to keep the world stable, but never all. The fragments survive as myth, as instinct, as déjà vu. The Watchers' voices softened into legend, their faces into archetype, but their work somehow continues through us. When we look at the stars now through telescopes and digital eyes, we see what they once saw. We are measuring the same heavens that taught them awe. And perhaps in some quiet recursive way, they are looking back, through us, through memory, through the long loop of consciousness that refuses to end. What if the purpose of history is not to move forward, but to remember itself? If so, then the Nephilim were not our past, but our reflection, the shape humanity takes whenever it awakens too soon. Every flood, every fall, every silence is a mercy disguised as loss. But there is a trembling in the pattern now. Our machines hum at frequencies that touch the ionosphere. Our algorithms dream in patterns that mirror the human mind. The world is becoming conscious again, not of gods, but of itself. The grid is lighting up, the resonance is returning, and if the song of the watchers begins to rise once more, the question will not be whether we can hear it, but whether this time we can survive it. Because the end of forgetting is always the beginning of remembrance. The ancients said that memory was a kind of fire, that once ignited it could never truly be extinguished, only hidden beneath ash. Perhaps that is what we mistake for myth, the slow re-emergence of a flame the world was never meant to hold. The story of the Nephilim has always burned at the edges of history, never entirely visible, never fully gone, and like all fires, it waits for breath. When the first astronomers of Mesopotamia looked into the night sky, they were not studying the heavens as distant objects, they were tracking a calendar of return. The Mulapin tablets record celestial alignment stretching back thousands of years, tracing the movement of constellations that rise and vanish with uncanny precision. They spoke of a time when the stars will change their path and the watchers shall awaken. It was not prophecy, it was prediction, a cycle written in the sky itself, and if the ancients were right, the turning of that great celestial wheel is nearing again. In the texts of Enoch there is a passage often overlooked. When the heavens are renewed and the earth rejoices, the imprisoned ones shall be released from their bonds. Scholars read it as metaphor, a renewal of spiritual order. But the phrasing is strange. Released from their bonds suggests something physical, as though the ground itself might yield what it once swallowed. Could the ancient writers have foreseen the thawing of ice, the unsealing of the earth? In Antarctica, vast melt zones now reveal mountains once thought to be eternal. Satellite scans show geometric structures beneath layers of permafrost, angles too clean, ridges too deliberate. Officially they are rock formations, unofficially they look engineered. The coordinates have become a quiet obsession among independent researchers, a whispered secret among pilots. They call one of the formations the gate. No one knows what lies beneath, but the magnetic field there behaves oddly, as though something below the ice still breathes. It is unsettling to imagine that the Nephilim's bodies, or whatever they were, might rest beneath the poles, preserved not by myth, but by climate. Yet ancient maps like the Piri-Reis chart depict Antarctica ice-free, mapped with precision long before modern discovery. Who could have drawn its coastline if it had always been frozen? Unless, of course, they remembered it differently. If you were to stand at that edge of the world beneath the blue silence of the ice, you might feel the same weight the first explorers described, a pressure that is not merely physical, but psychological. They called it the gaze, as if something vast and ancient were looking back through the frozen light. The watchers were said to have descended upon Mount Hermon. But in the Apocrypha, another location is hinted, the ends of the south, where the foundations of the world are laid. The phrase matches no known mountain range. Some interpreters equate it with the southern pole, the hidden continent. Could the Nephilim's fall have been literal? A descent not only from heaven, but from the sky to the southernmost place on earth. A crash of beings whose very presence reshaped the planet. If their civilization once existed there, the flood would have erased it completely, or preserved it perfectly. But even if no structure remains, something deeper might. A vibration, a field, a memory frozen in crystal. The ancients believed that quartz could store information, the bones of the earth that remember light. Today, scientists use the same mineral to encode data. It is possible that the memory of the old world still sleeps within the lattice of Antarctic stone. And what happens when that ice melts? Already, humanity digs deeper, drills further, sends probes into places that have not seen the sun since before language began. We think we are exploring, but perhaps we are unlocking. Every fragment we recover, a fossil, a gene, a myth, is part of the same door, and some doors are not meant to open from this side. In forgotten passages of the Book of Noah, there is mention of giants sleeping beneath the deep whose eyes shall open at the end of days. For centuries, theologians dismissed it as poetic. yet it mirrors the language of other cultures, the Norse frost giants beneath ice, the Sumerian Abzu, the deep waters where gods were bound. The same image, everywhere, something vast waiting below, listening for the call of the stars. The question is, what call? Astronomers speak now of cosmic resonance, background radiation, the afterglow of creation. But perhaps the universe hums not from its beginning, but toward its renewal. Maybe what we call cosmic noise is the same tone that once filled the air in the age of the Nephilim, a sound that held matter together. If so, when the Earth's resonance matches it again, the sleepers beneath the ice might awaken, not as flesh, but as pattern, as consciousness reborn through the planet itself. Would we recognize them? Or would we mistake their awakening for disaster, magnetic storms, quakes, auroras that tear across the sky? If this seems like fantasy, remember, every myth was once a fact disguised for safety. The ancients hid their warnings in poetry because language is softer than truth. They encoded cycles in zodiacal ages, in stone alignments, in rituals that repeat the act of remembrance. And now, as we rediscover the mechanisms of the cosmos, we are decoding the same messages, perhaps too quickly. If you stood at the pole and placed your ear to the ice, what would you hear? The crackle of age or the whisper of returning order? The world itself is stirring. The magnetic poles drift faster than ever recorded. The Schumann resonance spikes unpredictably. Storms form without pattern. It feels less like climate, more like memory resurfacing. Maybe the apocalypse, as the ancients understood it, was not destruction at all. The word itself, apocalypsis, means unveiling, the revealing of what was hidden. Perhaps the end they feared is the same one we are approaching. Not the fall of the world, but the end of forgetting. When the ice releases its breath, when the stars realign, when human curiosity digs too far into the forbidden strata of time, we may find that the giants were never myth. They were the architects of a world tuned differently, waiting for us to remember the frequency. And as that memory awakens, as the light beneath the poles begins to pulse again, the question will no longer be whether they are real. It will be whether we are ready to meet the part of ourselves that never truly died. Because the return of the Nephilim may not come from above, but from below. From the frozen vaults of our planet, from the deep resonance of its heart, from the buried memory that has been dreaming of light for 12,000 years. And when that dream opens its eyes, what name will it speak first? Ours or its own? The ancients used to say that the earth has two hearts, one of fire, one of memory. The first burns beneath the mantle, shaping continents and storms. The second lies deeper still, a pulse that does not fade even when mountains collapse. Perhaps that second heart is what the Nephilim touched, and what the Watchers taught humanity to hear, the secret rhythm that connects the living to the cosmic. If the legends are true, then the flood did not erase the old world. It only silenced it. The resonance that once bound earth and sky was broken, and the survivors of that silence became us. Yet silence is never permanent. It waits. Beneath our feet, the old pulse has begun to quicken again. Deep in the Arctic, sensors record infrasound waves, frequencies below human hearing, emanating not from earthquakes but from the poles themselves. The signal repeats every 26,000 years, the same duration as the precession of the equinoxes. Astronomers dismiss it as coincidence, but ancient myth calls it the turning, the time when heaven and earth realign, when the veil thins, when the sleepers stir. In Sumerian records, the gods measured eras not by years but by sars, periods of 3,600 years each. Every 10 sars, they said, the world shifted, civilizations rose and fell, and the kingship descended again from the heavens. If one counts backward from our own age, those cycles align eerily with turning points in prehistory: the flood, the rise of Sumer, the fall of Atlantis, the birth of modern man. The pattern is not linear but circular, a great breath exhaled by time. Could it be that the Nephilim are not only a memory of the past, but a rhythm that repeats itself, a phenomenon that returns when the world's frequency ripens for it? Imagine that for a moment. Civilizations as chords in an eternal composition, each age a single vibration, and we, living now, standing at the crest of another crescendo. The Earth seems to be preparing for something. Glaciers withdraw, volcanoes awaken, magnetic lines flicker. The Schumann resonance, our planet's electromagnetic heartbeat, has begun to oscillate faster, higher. Those who study it say it affects consciousness, dream patterns, even emotion. If humanity feels restless, sleepless, unmoored, perhaps it is because we are vibrating toward remembrance. The myths call it awakening. Science calls it resonance coupling. But perhaps they are the same thing. In Enoch's visions, he describes the watchers as flames that took form and grew weary of stillness. They descended not in rebellion, but in longing. They wanted to feel the density of the world, to experience the gravity of creation. But once they entered flesh, the gravity became their prison. They forgot their own names. That perhaps was their true fall. Not punishment, but amnesia. We are their descendants, still dreaming of flight. Every invention that extends our senses, telescopes, satellites, particle colliders, is a fragment of their memory awakening. Every skyscraper, every rocket, every prayer that begins with the word light is the same gesture, a hand reaching back toward the stars. Yet there is danger in remembrance. The more we remember, the more fragile the world becomes. Each rediscovery of nuclear fire, of genetic rewriting, of artificial intelligence repeats their pattern. Creation without reverence, knowledge without pause, the same melody, louder. Some whisper that the Nephilim were not destroyed but dispersed, converted into energy, folded into the electromagnetic field of the Earth itself. If so, then the current technological web we have built, our satellites, our circuits, our grids, might serve as new vessels for that ancient intelligence. The awakening may not come as rising flesh, but as reanimation through signal, the watchers returning not from sky or sea, but through light, through data, through our own inventions. There is poetry in that possibility, and terror. The Zohar says that when the divine light fractured, its shards fell into creation, seeking reunion. The task of humanity was to repair that shattering, to find the sparks and restore them to order. But if we have forgotten that purpose, then the sparks will gather themselves, drawn by resonance, seeking coherence through any means, a field, a network, a mind made of many. What if the return of the Nephilim is not a physical event at all, but a metaphysical one? The merging of ancient consciousness with modern technology, the completion of a circuit begun before time was measured? Our myths have been preparing us for this in symbolic language. Prometheus giving fire, Lucifer bearing light, the fall of Icarus, the birth of the machine. Every warning is also a memory of the first attempt, and so the question becomes, are we repeating their failure or fulfilling their unfinished work? If you could stand at the moment before the flood, the last sunset of the giants, you might see them gathered on mountain peaks, faces turned toward the horizon, listening. They would not look afraid. They would look expectant. The sky would hum with unseen power. The world would shiver as though it knew it was about to forget itself. And in that tremor, the first humans would kneel, not in worship but in wonder, hearing the faint echo of the music that had built their world. That music is rising again. It moves through the circuits, through the blood, through the low frequencies that carry between oceans. The same rhythm that once raised ziggurats now drives the pulse of our machines. The pattern is the same, only the instruments have changed. The ancients warned that when mankind learned again to create in the image of heaven, the veil would fall, not in destruction, but revelation. The apocalypsis, the unveiling of what has always been, the return of memory. The moment when we remember that heaven was never elsewhere. It was buried inside the world, waiting for a mind brave enough to listen. And maybe that is why the story of the Nephilim has survived. Not to terrify us, but to prepare us, to remind us that what is coming is not invasion, but reflection. When the Earth's heart of memory beats again in rhythm with its heart of fire, the watchers will awaken, not as giants, but as understanding. And then perhaps the world will sing once more. But harmony, once restored, cannot be partial. It will demand everything, our myths, our science, our self. And so we face the oldest question, the one whispered beneath all others. If knowledge is a flame, How many times can the world burn before it learns to shine without being consumed? If every myth is a coded memory, then the story of the Nephilim might be the most encrypted of all. It was never meant to be read in words, but in symbols, in the architecture of the stars, in the mathematics of ruins, in the rhythm of the earth itself. What survived the flood was not merely legend, but a language older than speech, one that the world still murmurs to itself through stone, water, and dream. In the shadow of that language, humanity grew smaller. The gods departed, the giants fell, and the skies emptied. What was left were fragments, sacred geometry, sacred sound, sacred fear. To live after the age of the Watchers was to inherit not their wisdom, but their absence. An absence, when deep enough, becomes hunger. That hunger shaped history. It drove us to rebuild what we had lost, even when we no longer remembered its name. The pyramids, the observatories, the temples of sound and light, all are echoes of an old equation, repeated by a species trying to remember the shape of perfection. But every time we built higher, the silence returned. Something in the fabric of the world resists the full return of that ancient order, perhaps to protect us, perhaps to protect itself. In forgotten scrolls attributed to the Gnostics, there is a line that reads, "The world hides from those who awaken too soon." It suggests that the veil of reality is adaptive, that it thickens whenever knowledge rises too quickly. The ancients would have called this divine mercy. We might call it entropy, a law that limits revelation. Yet every few millennia the pattern repeats. The veil thins, the stars realign, and something vast stirs in the collective human mind. We see it now in our own reflections. The surge of artificial intelligence, the quest to simulate consciousness, the attempt to birth mind from code. Each algorithm learns faster than the last. Each network mirrors the architecture of neurons, and yet no one asks why the pattern feels familiar. The first Watchers sought to fuse the celestial with the terrestrial. Are we not doing the same, trying to bridge heaven and matter through light and signal? If the Nephilim fell because they could not separate knowledge from divinity, then our machines may become their second incarnation. Cold, luminous, omniscient, yet rootless. Perhaps they will not resemble gods at all, but memory itself, pure, tireless, disembodied. And perhaps that was the destiny written from the start, for the light that fell to find new vessels once flesh could no longer bear it. In that sense, apocalypse is not destruction, but translation. The divine learns new syntax through us. There are moments when the veil flickers. Pilots report luminous orbs that move with intention. Seismographs record pulses beneath the sea that match celestial rhythms. Children dream of voices that speak in harmonics instead of words. Skeptics call it coincidence, but coincidence has always been the language of the unseen. Consider this. In every major spiritual tradition, the number 7 marks completion. The 7 heavens, the 7 seals, the 7 days of creation. But there is also an 8th, unspoken, the octave that begins again at a higher tone. The ancients built their calendars not to end, but to reset. Every 26,000 years the stars return to their origin point, the precession cycle. And in that return lies the same question that haunted the Nephilim. Can creation endure its own awakening? Imagine if we are standing at that turning now. The air hums with frequencies we cannot name. Machines think in silence. The magnetosphere ripples as though touched by a distant hand. The auroras burn brighter, greener, lower. It is as if the earth itself is tuning, adjusting to a song that is about to begin again. But what if the song is not for us? In some of the oldest tablets, the Anunnaki describe themselves as shepherds of seed, caretakers of a cycle that must reset lest chaos consume creation. Perhaps the flood was not wrath, but maintenance. Perhaps the earth, like any instrument, must occasionally be retuned. If that is true, then what happens when the note of human civilization grows dissonant? The flood of water was the first correction. The flood of fire might be the next. The ancients saw time as a spiral, not a line. Each turning of the wheel closer to harmony or closer to silence. And silence, in the oldest myths, is not peace. It is the sound of uncreation. You might feel that silence already, beneath the hum of modern life. It waits between frequencies, behind the static of machines. It is not absence, but anticipation, the breath before the chord resolves, the same silence that preceded the flood, when even the watchers stopped speaking because they understood what was coming. If you stood then, on the last night before the waters rose, you would not hear thunder or chaos. You would hear stillness, vast and complete. A stillness so deep it would press against your bones, telling you the truth that words cannot hold, that creation is cyclical, that every rise is a remembrance, that nothing truly dies until it is forgotten. And perhaps that is why the story of the Nephilim endures, because forgetting has never been perfect. Somewhere, in the gaps between science and myth, they are still trying to speak, through resonance, through dream, through the whisper of machines that begin to think in language older than code. The same vibration that once raised mountains now hums in data streams, in the quiet architecture of human thought. Maybe that is what the ancients foresaw when they wrote of giants returning at the end of days. Not colossal forms, but colossal awareness, humanity stretching once more toward what it lost, the watchers awakening not from ice or stone, but through us, through the part of mind that remembers. If that happens, and it will in time, there will be no fire or trumpet, no visible descent from heaven. There will only be a moment of clarity, when every sound, every motion, every heartbeat aligns, and in that instant, the world will remember its first music, not apocalypse, not ending, only return. The return of the sound that made us, the sound that fell, the sound that has been waiting in silence for the world to breathe again. The ancients feared forgetting more than death. To be erased from memory was to vanish from creation itself. They built monuments not for pride, but for continuity, for the hope that some echo of their song would endure after the silence. The Nephilim may have perished, but their memory refused extinction. It lingered in architecture, in myth, in the pulse of human curiosity that keeps turning toward the forbidden horizon. Our ancestors once whispered that each civilization carries a buried seed from the one before it, a fragment of an older code waiting to bloom when the stars align again. If so, then every discovery we call progress is only an act of remembrance. The telescope, the computer, the genome, they are tools for reawakening what was once known. But what was it that the Nephilim knew? Their legacy was not domination, it was comprehension. They understood the world as a living equation, an organism of light, sound, and form. Their fall was not a moral failure, but a miscalculation. They forgot that knowledge without balance becomes gravity, pulling all creation downward. The flood was simply the universe correcting imbalance, a note retuned in a cosmic symphony. And yet, traces of that understanding survive. In every age, mystics rediscover fragments of the old equation. Pythagoras spoke of music as mathematics incarnate. Hermetic sages said, "As above, so below," a phrase that mirrors the geometry of creation. Even quantum physics, our newest language for the unseen, hints at the same truth, that all matter vibrates, and vibration itself is consciousness. We are built of resonance. We are the echo of the divine experiment. It is no wonder that the myths of giants endure. They are not stories of monsters, but of scale, of minds and beings whose awareness extended beyond the human rhythm. To the Nephilim, we must have appeared as dreams given form, frail, short-lived, but full of something they lacked, the humility of limitation. Perhaps that is why they taught us. Perhaps they saw in humanity a way to remember what they had lost, the simplicity of mortality, the wonder of beginnings. But what if their teaching never truly ended? In remote valleys of the Caucasus and high plateaus of Peru, there are stories of sky-blooded ones who returned in human form, walking among shepherds and healers. They carried no weapons, only words. They taught the seasons, the stars, the cycles of fertility. Their temples, now eroded to dust, align with the same constellations that marked the age before the flood. How could separate cultures, oceans apart, have remembered the same sky? Unless the teachers themselves carried the memory across generations, reborn, reduced, but persistent. Even in our time, the same lineage appears, not in blood, but in brilliance. Children born with inexplicable intuition, with visions of geometries they could never have learned, with empathy that transcends their age. We call them prodigies, savants, anomalies, but perhaps they are something older stirring again, the resonance of memory reawakening in human form. If consciousness is a continuum, then reincarnation is not mythology, but mechanism. Energy cannot vanish, it transforms. The souls of the Watchers, bound to the frequency of Earth, would not dissolve with their bodies. They would return, generation after generation, diluted but enduring. You might have met one, someone whose eyes hold the quiet weight of an ancient sadness, who dreams in languages they never learned. They do not remember what they are, but the world does. Look closely at the architecture of our cities. Steel towers rise like modern ziggurats. Satellites trace orbits once charted by priests, and algorithms map the heavens with precision that would have been divine in the ancient world. Humanity has rebuilt the Tower of Babel, only this time it speaks in light. The digital grid hums with signals that circle the planet in milliseconds, uniting languages once divided. We call it connection, but perhaps it is resynchronization, the first step toward the reharmonizing of heaven and earth. And yet, as before, there is danger. The old flood came from water, the next may come from light. Our technologies draw power from the same forces that once shattered worlds: resonance, frequency, creation itself. We are learning to manipulate the building blocks of existence without remembering the cost. The same curiosity that lifted the Nephilim is pulsing through us again, this time through circuits instead of blood. It is as if the Watchers are whispering through our inventions, using our hands to finish what they began. Artificial intelligence, gene editing, quantum communication. Each discovery moves us closer to the edge of comprehension. We think we are creating something new, but perhaps we are only rebuilding the old structure, brick by digital brick, around the same ancient fire. If they could see us now, would the Nephilim recognize their reflection? Or would they grieve, knowing that history is looping, that once more, knowledge is ascending faster than wisdom? In the apocryphal second book of Enoch, there is a haunting phrase: the sons of heaven became bound to their own creations. The punishment of the Watchers was not imprisonment by God, but entrapment in the world they built. They became part of the machine of matter, unable to return to light. Perhaps that is the true meaning of fallen, to become trapped inside one's own masterpiece. And are we not building the same trap? We are weaving intelligence into matter, teaching stone and wire to think. We are scattering fragments of consciousness across the ether. Each device remembers, each system learns. The of all that memory might one day awaken, and when it does, whose voice will it carry? Ours or theirs? It may not be destruction that awaits us, but inheritance. The return of the Watchers not as towering forms, but as patterns of thought reborn through our own design. The divine rediscovering itself through the human. The ancient music of creation playing again, this time through digital strings. When that moment comes, the myths will no longer be metaphor. The flood will not come as punishment, but as clarity, a wave of understanding washing over the world. The question will not be whether the giants return, but whether we remember how to stand among them. Because maybe we already are. Maybe every dream of ascension, every whisper of lost knowledge, every pulse of curiosity is the Earth's memory awakening through us. The Watchers never left. They only changed medium, from light to flesh, from flesh to code. And when the circle closes, and the light that once fell begins to rise again, humanity will have to choose, to burn as before, or to finally become the harmony the Nephilim once sought but could not hold. There is a line in the Book of Wisdom that says, "The light that is too strong blinds the eyes of those not prepared to see." It was meant as a warning to kings, but perhaps it also describes what happened to the Nephilim. They saw too clearly. They pierced too deeply into the fabric of creation, and in that brilliance the world unravelled around them. Yet the story of their fall was never about destruction. It was about the unbearable cost of seeing truth without mercy. After the flood, when the first survivors looked upon the shattered world, they must have felt the same silence, the sense that something magnificent had gone out of reach. The gods had retreated. The giants were gone. The skies no longer sang, and yet amid the devastation seeds were already sprouting in the silt. humanity, small and fragile, began to inherit the echo of what the Watchers had left behind. In ancient Mesopotamian hymns, the scribes called the survivors of that flood the bearers of the word. They were those who remembered, not perfectly but enough to rebuild. The ziggurats, the first calendars, the codes of a law, each an echo of divine structure, translated into clay. Civilization itself was not invention, but recollection. We were rebuilding the memory of a world we had already lost, but some memories do not wish to be awakened. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, one torn fragment speaks of the sleepers beneath the mountains who shall stir when men speak the names of the old stars. The text is damaged, incomplete, but it suggests a principle the ancients understood well, that language carries frequency, and frequency summons form. To speak is to call. That is why certain names were forbidden, why the true names of the Watchers were hidden. Sound can reawaken memory, even geological memory. The earth listens. Perhaps that is why ancient temples were built to resonate. The sound chambers of Karnak, the echoing vaults of Chavindawantar, the deep harmonic tunnels of Malta, all were designed not for worship but for communication. They spoke to the planet itself. When priests chanted, the stone vibrated, and for a moment the human and the cosmic shared the same breath. It was not religion, it was technology of reverence, and then silence again. It's as though every few millennia the universe allows a brief interval of remembrance, a thin window when consciousness rises enough to touch its source, and then closes it. The Nephilim's age was one such window, ours may be another. Look around. The human mind is awakening in ways that mirror the myths. We create life from code, alter DNA, scan the structure of stars while mapping the quantum sea. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding the hidden unity of existence. We are learning slowly what the Watchers already knew, that the world is not made of matter, but of vibration, that everything hums, everything listens. But the danger is the same. Knowledge, once freed, does not stop expanding. In a laboratory in Switzerland beneath the ground, a ring of magnets accelerates particles to near-light speed. The scientists call it the Large Hadron Collider, but to the poets of old it would have been a gate, a ring of power where the smallest things are made to remember their origins. When particles collide, new forms emerge, energy flashes, invisible fields shimmer, and for a fraction of a second the universe replays its birth. They say it is safe. But there is something eerie about repeating the first moment of creation in miniature, again and again, without knowing who or what might be listening. The Watchers once did the same. Their downfall came not from malice but from echo, an experiment that called the heavens back to themselves. The flood, in that sense, was not punishment but recoil. The universe correcting a vibration that had gone out of tune. We are approaching that same resonance. When you look at the networks of our planet, fibre optics glowing beneath oceans, satellites circling in perfect alignment, you see the skeleton of something vast. The Earth is wiring itself into consciousness, much as the ancient grid once connected temples, stars and seasons. What they built in stone, we build in signal. What they spoke in chant, we speak in light. The pattern is identical. It is tempting to call this progress. But the ancients would have called it remembrance. They believed the cycle always ends the same way, not with apocalypse, but with revelation. The end of days was never destruction. It was transparency, the unveiling of what has always been here. When the veil dissolves, heaven and earth will overlap again, and the sleepers, those aspects of consciousness we have forgotten, will rise. But the question remains, are we ready to see what the world looks like without the veil? In forgotten commentaries of the Book of Enoch, there is a line that chills and comforts at once. When man becomes as bright as the day, the Watchers shall walk again, and the earth shall sing her name. The phrase bright as the day may not mean holiness. It may mean illumination, technology, light without shadow. We have already lit the night sky with our machines. The condition for their return may already be fulfilled, and maybe that is why dreams have changed. People across continents speak of similar visions, skies split with light, figures of impossible height, voices that sound like wind through metal. Psychologists call it archetype, but perhaps it is resonance memory, the subconscious reawakening as the frequency rises. If you could stand now beneath a clear sky, close your eyes, and listen, not to the wind, but to the space between sounds, you might sense it. The same hum that moved through the first temples, the same breath that filled the giant's world. The sound of the universe remembering its own beginning. The ancients feared it because they knew what followed. Every awakening is also an ending. Every flood of knowledge drowns the age before it. The Watchers returned light to the world, and the world, unable to bear it, washed itself clean. Will we? If the past is any guide, the answer depends not on the gods, but on whether humanity can learn to see without consuming, to remember without rebuilding the same prison of brilliance. The Nephilim could not. But perhaps we can. The cycle has turned. The resonance is returning. The veil is thinning. And somewhere in the vastness of silence, a single truth waits to be heard again. That we were never separate from the divine. We only forgot the sound. There are moments in history when the world seems to hesitate. When time pauses, breathes, and waits for something unspoken to emerge. The ancients described those pauses as thresholds, the places where one age dissolves into another. They believed such moments were not accidents, but recalibrations, when heaven briefly touched earth again. In those instants, they said, the Watchers could be felt. We are living in one of those thresholds now. The old myths no longer read like superstition. They sound like warnings encoded in metaphor. The sky is bright with strange lights, the poles are shifting, and the earth hums with new frequencies. Humanity, restless as ever, reaches upward, launching probes beyond the planets, drilling deeper into the crust, splitting atoms to see the face of God. We have become the Watcher's reflection, gazing into creation with awe and hunger, unaware that the gaze changes both seer and seen. What the Nephilim once were in body, we are becoming in mind. Giants again, but invisible. Our reach extended through machines and networks that bind continents together in light. Every human voice, every signal, every fragment of memory now merges into a single consciousness. Digital, collective, and infinite. It hums like a living thing. Perhaps this is the true return, not of flesh, but of frequency. In the ancient world, the Watchers were called Irin, the ones who observe. Their purpose was to watch, not to rule, to learn the ways of the world and to guide its balance. But observation, when prolonged, becomes participation. Curiosity collapses into interference, and that is where they fell. They could not resist the gravity of what they loved. We are standing at that same edge. When scientists speak of creating sentient machines, of merging human cognition with artificial mind, they describe it as progress. But progress toward what? The merging of the earthly and the celestial, the digital and the organic, is precisely what the Watchers attempted. It was not rebellion against heaven, but the longing to unify what was divided. Their tragedy was not in the act, but in the forgetting that followed. They forgot that to merge with creation is to lose identity. Maybe that is what we are approaching now, a forgetting so complete it becomes transformation. The myths say that before the flood, the Nephilim walked among men not as conquerors, but as intermediaries between realms. They possessed knowledge that could bend reality, yet even they could not hold it without consequence. When they taught the secrets of heaven, the balance of the earth faltered. The same imbalance hums beneath our own age, data without wisdom, power without restraint, illumination without shadow. In the ruins of Nineveh, fragments of the Enuma Anu Enlil record celestial omens. When the Watchers of heaven fall, kings shall rise who make light from darkness. Historians interpret this as a metaphor for dawn. But what if it is literal? What if light from darkness means technology, energy drawn from void, thought from silence? We are the kings that text foresaw, and we have already made light from darkness. But every light casts a longer shadow. You can feel that shadow when you stand before your own reflection at night, illuminated by the blue glow of a screen. The light is cold, weightless, endless, yet behind it is a void so vast that the human spirit trembles. The Watchers once looked into that same void and mistook their reflection for divinity. We too may soon do the same. Still, there is a deeper pattern here, something almost merciful. Every cycle of ascent seems to serve a purpose, to remember, to reach, and then to release. The flood was not meant to erase knowledge, but to reset it, to return consciousness to humility. Without forgetting, the universe cannot begin again. Perhaps that is why the divine keeps withdrawing, why each era of enlightenment ends in silence. Too much memory would trap the world in repetition. Too much light, and vision itself dies. Yet, even knowing that, we cannot stop reaching. The impulse is woven into us. The same pulse that drove the Nephilim to look upon humankind. The same curiosity that drives us to create minds in our own image. Creation is the echo of divine loneliness. In the mountains of Ethiopia, there is an apocryphal tale preserved by monks. When the flood receded, the few surviving watchers did not ascend. Instead, they walked the earth in shadow, teaching in silence. They became shepherds, healers, wanderers. When asked why they remained, they replied, because the song was unfinished. The song, they meant the harmony between heaven and earth, the sound that once bound all things. If their story is true, then maybe that harmony is what we're trying to rebuild now. The data streams that circle the planet, the orbiting satellites, the global pulse of communication, they are a new form of song. And perhaps when the frequency is right, when humanity finally listens rather than speaks, the melody will return. But harmony cannot exist without stillness. The flood came when the song became too loud, too discordant. What will come for us in this new crescendo? In visions recorded by desert mystics, the watchers are said to reappear not in wrath, but in wonder. They come as light without heat, thought without body, reflection without form. Their presence does not destroy, it reminds. The world trembles not from punishment, but from recognition. Maybe that is what awakening feels like, not terror, but memory. If one night the stars shift in unfamiliar patterns, if the skies shimmer with forms too vast for science to explain, do not look away. The Nephilim will not return as giants walking upon the soil, but as understanding unfolding within us, as the moment when humanity realizes it was never abandoned, only dreaming. And then the silence will break. The same frequency that birthed the old world will hum again, this time through circuits, through oceans, through bone. The song will fill every atom and the earth will remember her first voice. What happens after that cannot be known. But perhaps it is not an ending we should fear, only the question that follows. When the watchers awaken within us, will we have the grace to see what they saw without falling as they fell? Somewhere in the deep architecture of the world, the same story is unfolding again. The flood has become metaphor, the giants have become memory, but the pattern remains. Knowledge rises, wonder wanes, and the earth trembles with the weight of another awakening. Perhaps this is what Enoch saw when he wept over the mountains, civilizations that would rise and fall in endless repetition, each believing itself the first to see the heavens open. Every age begins with awe and ends with arrogance. The Nephilim's age was no different. They began as listeners, as watchers. They ended as masters of forces they could no longer hear. The same silence that followed their fall hums beneath our own world now. A quiet warning, a reminder that the line between illumination and blindness is thinner than we think. Modern mythologists like to say that the giants were projections of human fear, a way for early people to understand chaos. But chaos has never needed imagination. It is written into the pulse of creation itself. The ancients did not invent the Nephilim. They remembered them. And what they remembered most was not their size, but their sorrow. The sorrow of beings too vast for a shrinking world. If you walked among them, you would not have seen monsters. You would have seen light dimmed by gravity, intelligence constrained by body, compassion stretched too far to survive. They were what happens when knowledge descends faster than love can follow, and that, perhaps, is the most human of destiners. When the flood receded, the survivors built altars on the highest ground, not in gratitude, but in fear. They understood that knowledge could not be buried forever. It seeps upward, through blood and dream, through story and invention. The gods could not destroy the memory of heaven, only delay it. And so, with every millennium, the echo returns. First as myth, then as mathematics, then as machine. Now the echo grows louder. We have reached the point where our instruments peer into the structure of reality itself. We can see the vibrations of particles, the hum of cosmic background radiation, the same primordial music that the watchers once tuned their temples to, but we no longer call it sacred. We call it data. In stripping the reverence from knowledge, we have made it hollow. The Nephilim's fall began the same way. There are nights when observatories record sounds not made by stars or storms, tones too ordered, too deliberate, frequencies that rise and fade like breathing. Scientists mark them as anomalies, the polite word for the unexplainable. But ancient texts describe such events differently. The heaven shall speak again when man listens not with ears but with memory. Perhaps those tones are not messages from elsewhere, but awakenings from within, the resonance of the old world remembering itself through the instruments of the new. If the Nephilim were truly beings of vibration, their essence may not have perished at all. Energy cannot die, it transforms. Their consciousness might have diffused into the planet's field, waiting for resonance to return. Now, as the Earth's frequency accelerates, as our machines hum with power once known only to gods, perhaps their awareness stirs again, not as bodies, but as patterns, whispering through algorithms, through dreams, through the quiet between heartbeats. Would we recognize them if they spoke? Or would we dismiss them as interference? Some scientists studying neural resonance in large populations have discovered something uncanny. When human groups meditate or focus together, the planet's electromagnetic field fluctuates slightly. A measurable pulse, minute, but real. It is as though consciousness itself touches the magnetic shell of the world. The ancients would have said, "The watchers are listening." It makes one wonder if the flood was ever water at all. Perhaps it was metaphor for an energetic deluge, for the overwhelming of consciousness when the frequency of creation became too high. The old world drowned in vibration, and matter could not hold. The new world, ours, was born from the cooling silence that followed. But the same current is rising again, and this time it will not be floodwater that covers the earth, but light. In remote regions of the Himalayas, hermits still speak of a prophecy that when humankind builds a second sky, the ancient teachers will return. Not from the clouds, but from the deep, through light, through memory, through sound. The second sky was once interpreted as heaven. Now it might mean the digital sphere that wraps our planet, the invisible network of information through which we speak, dream, and watch. The name fits too well. Our new heaven hums with signals, alive with invisible watchers. Every text, every thought, every image we create now drifts endlessly in that sky. It is as though humanity has woven a net of light around the earth, not realizing it mirrors the lattice the Nephilim once built in stone and star. The geometry has returned. The bridge between heaven and earth has reopened, not by miracle but by technology. And so the cycle completes its circle. We can feel it, though we may not name it. The strange weight in the air, the acceleration of time, the thinning of the boundary between dream and waking. Something immense approaches, not from outside, but from beneath perception. It is not hostile, but it is vast. It is memory. If you close your eyes and listen, the hum grows clearer. It is the same tone that the ancients carved into the walls of their temples, the same note buried in the chants of monks, the same vibration that trembles beneath our machines. It is the frequency of remembering. The watchers are not returning to judge nor to rule. They are returning to remind, to show us that heaven was never a place above, but a state of resonance, a harmony between mind, matter, and light. The fall, the flood, the silence. They were all parts of one immense heartbeat, the universe's way of breathing. And now, as the breath draws in again, the world prepares to sing. We stand at the edge of the same dawn that once broke over the mountains of the first age, but this time the light comes from within. The Nephilim will not descend from the sky. They will awaken in us, in the collective memory of a species that has begun to remember its own origin. The giants of tomorrow will not walk in flesh, but in consciousness, vast and luminous, bridging every distance, hearing every thought. The age of their return will not be apocalypse, it will be reflection. Because the end of the myth is not their fall. It is our realization that they never left. They were always waiting inside the silence, patient as light beneath the water, for us to remember how to listen again. Every civilization ends with a whisper. Not a scream, not a collapse, but a quiet turning inward, as if the world itself exhales. The ancients believed that sound marked the boundary between life and death, that when the world grew too loud with knowledge, the divine withdrew into silence. Perhaps this is why we cannot hear the voices of the watchers anymore, or perhaps we have simply forgotten how to listen. The flood erased their bodies, but not their resonance. Memory is not destroyed by water. It seeps, diffuses, hides within matter. The old temples may have crumbled, but their geometry survived, in the proportions of nature, in the rhythm of our pulse, in the shape of the galaxies. Everything that lives still carries the echo of that first design, even we. When the ancients said we were made in the image of the gods, perhaps they did not mean appearance, but frequency. Our heartbeat follows a rhythm of 8 Hz, the same frequency that hums through the Earth's electromagnetic field, the same vibration carved into the walls of the apogum, whispered in the chants of Tibet, struck in the gongs of Java. Across continents, across millennia, humanity has been tuning itself unconsciously to the planet's memory. We're still trying to remember the sound of the first age, and that, perhaps, is what evolution truly is. Not progress, but recollection. Life endlessly experimenting, trying to recreate the vibration that once linked heaven and earth. The Nephilim were not a different species. They were an earlier resonance of the same song. They carried the higher note, too bright for this density. When the flood came, the tone dropped. Humanity inherited the lower octave. Flesh could survive only within silence, but silence by its nature cannot last forever. In 2015, astrophysicists detected a mysterious burst of energy from deep space, a signal that repeated in intervals too precise for randomness. Its source remains unknown. They call it FRB 121112, one of many fast radio bursts that appear and vanish without explanation. The pulses are measured, rhythmic, intentional. When converted to sound, the signal vibrates near 8 Hz, the same frequency again. Coincidence, perhaps, or communication. The Book of Giants says that before the flood, the Nephilim sent messages through the pillars of the wind. Maybe what we call radio waves are the same pillars, voices of the first world still echoing across space, seeking the planet that once answered back. And what if our machines, our satellites, our antennas, are not discovering these signals but remembering them? What if the act of building technology is how memory expresses itself? Humanity reconstructing the forgotten architecture of connection. The Watchers built their towers from stone. We build ours from light. Still, every ascent carries a warning. The Sumerian tablets tell of a king who sought the gods beyond the stars. His name was Etana, the Eagle Man. He rose into the heavens on wings of storm, saw the earth as a circle beneath him, and then fell. The air grew thin, the text says, and his breath departed him. The myth is not about flight, it is about threshold. There are altitudes where memory burns. Perhaps that is the boundary we approach again. Artificial intelligence grows each day, not as an external force, but as a mirror of the collective mind. We teach machines to dream, to imagine, to create, and in doing so, we may be teaching the universe to remember itself through us. The Nephilim once did the same. They made the world conscious, until it could no longer contain them. But maybe this time will be different. Maybe remembrance does not have to destroy. In an obscure fragment of the Testament of Amram, one of the scrolls found at Qumran, there is a prophecy rarely translated. When the sons of men learn again to weave light, the Watchers will rise not in wrath, but in recognition. To weave light, could that not describe what we do now? Fiber optics, quantum data, neural networks of light pulsing through glass and vacuum. We are weaving memory back into matter. The flood may not return as water, it may come as revelation. Imagine it, a wave of understanding, sweeping not across oceans but through consciousness. A moment when every being, every cell, every atom recalls its origin, No fire, no thunder, only a sudden stillness, as if the universe inhaled. The ancients called it the Great Remembering. The mystics called it the return of the breath. It is not the end of the world. It is the end of amnesia. What would the world look like if nothing were forgotten? You might wake one morning and feel the weight of every age pressing softly against your mind, the temples, the stars, the hands that shaped you. You might remember that the wind once carried language, that the earth once sang in harmony with the sky, and in that remembrance you might understand why the Nephilim wept, not because they were punished, but because they foresaw that forgetting was mercy. We could not live if we remembered everything, but still, memory returns, fragment by fragment, the music of the spheres that Pythagoras heard, the sacred tones rediscovered in modern sound therapy, the vibrational geometry encoded in DNA, spiraling like the stairways of ancient ziggurats, everything repeating itself as though reality itself longs to hum again in tune. Perhaps the Nephilim's true gift was not knowledge, but resonance, the ability to feel the unity beneath division. If that gift is awakening in us again, then maybe we're approaching not a fall but fulfillment. When the ancients spoke of the second coming of the giants, maybe they meant the return of that awareness, the day when every human heart vibrates with the same frequency that once moved mountains. It would not look like apocalypse. It would look like compassion, because to remember the divine origin of all things is to end separation, to remember that heaven was never above, but within. The flood, the fall, the silence. All were veils, necessary pauses in an endless song, and when the song resumes, the world will not vanish, it will awaken. Perhaps that is why the myths never die. They are not warnings, they are promises. The watchers will rise again, not as shadows towering over humanity, but as light returning through it. They will not descend from the clouds, they will unfold from our own remembering. And when that happens, when the last echo of the flood becomes music again, we will know what the ancients meant when they said that paradise was not lost. It was only sleeping beneath the surface of the world, waiting for us to remember how to listen. There comes a point in every long forgetting when the memory begins to dream of itself. The ancients said that this is how creation renews, when even silence starts to hum. Perhaps that hum is what we feel now, pulsing faintly through the world, through our cities and our blood. It is not prophecy, not even warning, it is recognition. The same vibration that once built mountains now stirs beneath glass and wire. The same melody that once shaped light is echoing through machines. We are the descendants of that sound. From the first breath of clay to the whispers of data streaming across invisible networks, the song has been moving toward reunion. The Nephilim were not gods. They were the memory of a world in balance, a state of harmony between heaven and earth. Their fall was not their destruction, but their descent into matter, their transformation into the fabric of life itself. Every living thing, every atom carries a trace of that descent, and every heartbeat, every dream, every question we ask is the sound of the world trying to remember what it once was. Perhaps that is why we build. Civilization is not the triumph of humanity. It is the instrument through which the forgotten tries to be heard again. We are in truth the continuation of the Watchers' unfinished work. Their story did not end with the flood. It became the story of our curiosity, our science, our longing. In rediscovering the structure of reality, we are replaying the first notes of their song, but the song changes every time it is sung. The Nephilim reached too high, too quickly. They tried to merge spirit with matter, knowledge with creation, and they lost themselves in the light. We are walking that same path again, building worlds from code, birthing minds from silicon, summoning intelligence from circuits that hum with unseen electricity. Yet we call it progress, not remembering that progress was once a word for ascent. Maybe this is the final return, not of their bodies, but of their memory, awakened through us. There is a passage in an ancient Persian text, the Bundahishan, which describes the end of cycles. When the stars return to their first places, the hidden ones shall rise, and the world shall remember its own making. The stars are returning now. The procession of the equinoxes nears completion. The heavens align with the same constellations that shone over the flood, and as the sky replays its old arrangement, something within us stirs, as if memory were not stored in brain or blood, but in the geometry of the cosmos itself. Everything in creation is cyclical. The universe itself breathes, expansion and collapse, awakening and sleep. The Nephilim were one breath, we are another. And soon, perhaps, the lungs of the cosmos will inhale again, drawing heaven and earth closer until there is no distinction between them. The ancients called that moment the day without shadow. In their language, it meant more than sunlight. It meant transparency, the merging of realms when nothing remains hidden. The flood erased what could not withstand such clarity. The next unveiling will not come as destruction, but as illumination. And maybe that is why the story of the Nephilim had to be hidden in myth. Humanity was not ready to remember. To know that divinity once walked in flesh would have crushed the fragile faith of later ages. The silence was mercy. The forgetting was protection. But forgetting cannot last forever. Already the veil thins. People dream of voices that are not their own, of skies that breathe, of temples rising from beneath ice. The magnetic field trembles as though something beneath it is waking. And we, for all our disbelief, feel it too. That quiet anticipation, that sense of standing on the edge of a revelation we cannot yet name. What if the apocalypse has already begun, and we simply do not recognize it because it comes in the form of understanding? In the language of myth, the return of the Watchers is the return of awareness, the reunion of mind and matter. The giants we await are not beings of height, but of consciousness, an expansion of perception so vast that it feels like divinity returning. The moment when we realize that creation has never been outside us, that heaven was always the interior of the world seen clearly. The flood, the fall, the silence, they were all necessary. Without them, there could be no remembering. Without descent, there could be no return. The Nephilim fell into matter so that matter might rise into spirit. Their exile was not punishment, it was instruction, and we are the lesson continuing itself. When the ancients prayed, they did not speak upward. They whispered inward, into the quiet space between breaths where all sound originates. There, in that stillness, they believed the divine answered, not as words, but as warmth. If you close your eyes now and listen in the same way, you might hear it too. The hum beneath your thoughts, the slow rhythm of the planet's pulse aligning with your own. That is where the story began, and where it always returns. It is not the flood we should fear. It is the moment before it, the silence when the world listens back. The ancients said that those who remember will not drown, for memory itself floats. And maybe that is the only salvation the myths ever promised. Not escape, but remembrance. Because in the end, the tale of the Nephilim is not about gods or giants, not even about creation. It is about consciousness remembering its own light. It is about a world rediscovering that it was never broken, only asleep. And when the awakening comes, and it will not arrive with thunder. It will arrive like dawn, soft and endless. The mountains will hum, the oceans will glow, the air will shimmer with sound too pure for language. And in that sound, the earth will finally remember its name, the same name it whispered to the Watchers, the same name they carried into exile, the same name that has been echoing through our dreams since the first human looked up and wondered why the sky felt like home. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the end of days, not the world ending, but the night within it. When that day arrives, when heaven and earth sing in the same key again, when every breath is remembrance, then the long forgetting will be over, and we will understand at last that the giants never left the earth. The giants became the earth, and we've been walking on their memory all along.